The rise of totalitarianism in the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, 1930 to 1942. The introduction places totalitarianism at the extremes of the political spectrum, both on the far right and the far left. In the middle were democratic republics. In a democratic republic, sovereignty rests with the people. The people express that sovereignty through democratic elections, freedom of the press, freedom of speech. They enjoy freedom of worship. They enjoy liberty of conscience. They enjoy rights to a fair trial. All of those techniques were practiced in Western Europe after World War I. The economic collapse of the Great Depression put pressure on democratic republics. But as we've also seen, in Eastern Europe, there were authoritarian republics, military dictatorships, both on the right and on the left. They set about a different path for a republic. Their representation was exercised through the military. They sought out and hunted down enemies of the people. And so they did not enjoy freedom of the press, freedom of speech. They did not enjoy the right to vote. They did not have rights to a fair trial. Those authoritarian regimes were not very different from divine right monarchies. Totalitarianism was different, both from authoritarian and divine right systems. On the far left, we're going to discuss the differences with communism. The communists rested on Marxism. The communists supported materialism. The communists advocated a workers' revolution. The communists wanted to institute socialism across all aspects of the economy. The example we're going to see is Joseph Stalin's USSR, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. On the right hand of the political spectrum is fascism. The fascists favored a community's heritage. They supported the community's traditional spiritual institutions. The fascists promised middle-class stability. The fascists promised to protect capitalism. The example we'll see in the next lecture is Hitler's Third Reich. Republics, then, supported talk and compromise. Both political parties on the right and on the left talked to each other, debated with each other, sought political support from voters, and when they instituted policies, more often than not, they had to reach a compromise. Totalitarian dictators did just the opposite. They used violence to implement purity. The party, the single party in charge of a totalitarian state, did not tolerate debate, they did not tolerate voting, and whenever they made a decision, they purified all dissent. Leaders in totalitarian societies then behaved like each other. The differences on the political spectrum came from their motivation. On the far left were communist dictatorships, on the far right were fascist dictatorships. They both hated republics. This lecture will start with the death and resurrection of Lenin, move to Soviet purification, and end with rapid industrialization. Seeing how the Soviet Union transformed from an authoritarian regime to a totalitarian regime in about 10 years. After the Bolshevik Revolution, the Russian Communist Party established a dictatorship of the proletariat. The factory workers, the urban proletariat, would rule over Russia and transform it into a workers' paradise. In practice, that meant that the Soviet Union was a single-party republic, or technically a group or a federation of 15 republics, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. There was only one legal political party in that republic, the Communist Party. Vladimir Lenin sat at the apex of that party. Now, Lenin tolerated and even advocated internal debate inside the Communist Party, inside the Communist Central Committee. But once the Central Committee made a decision, he no longer advocated, tolerated, encouraged debate. The decision of the Central Committee stood, and it would be implemented without question or dissent, neither inside or outside of the Central Committee. Lenin's leadership, though, came under threat with a stroke. In 1922, Lenin experienced the first of a series of strokes. Those strokes prompted him to think about succession. In this picture, you see the two leading candidates for succession. On the far right was Leon Trotsky, and on the far left was Joseph Stalin. In his last will and testament, Lenin sat down and wrote about the characteristics of both, and he sat down and wrote about the future of the Communist Party. First and foremost, what is on his mind was the threat of partisanship. Now, we think of partisanship as political party partisanship. You have right-wing parties, left-wing parties, and they advocate based on different ideas. This partisanship was a little bit different because it was based on personalities rather than ideas. All of the members of the Communist Party shared a common set of ideas. They were Marxist. What Lenin was afraid of is that the strong personalities of Trotsky and Stalin would rip the Communist Party apart, that both of them had their followings. Most of all, Lenin was concerned with the threat of Stalin. Stalin was crude, he was rude, he was coarse. Stalin didn't tolerate debate, he didn't tolerate internal discussions. Stalin simply wanted to make a decision based on his own personal whim, and that would be the end of it. Trotsky, on the other hand, had a reputation for compromise, delegation, discussion, civility. Lenin clearly favored Trotsky in his succession. In an appendix to the last will and testament, Lenin laid out his regrets. From 30 to 31st December, he wrote about the status of the Soviet Union and the Communist Party, writing, "We have taken over Tsarism, only tarring it a little with a Soviet brush." In other words, he had adapted, inherited a whole host of czarist institutions, a secret police, censorship, lack of toleration, lack of fair trials. He claimed that all of that was necessary as long as there were counter-revolutionary forces actively trying to overthrow the Soviet Union. That's why he established the dictatorship of the proletariat. But in his last will and testament, he saw that he was not moving forward on the promises of communism. A workers' paradise, true equality, freedom of speech, all of the characteristics promised by the new socialist utopia. They simply weren't coming about in his lifetime. He had hoped that Trotsky would be able to succeed him and move the ball forward. This last will and testament never saw the light of day. Lenin died on the 12th of January, 1924. And at that point began his apotheosis. An apotheosis is a Greek term about how a hero is elevated to divine status. Lenin was a very simple and humble man. He did not take advantage of the power he had to enrich himself. He tried to remain a very humble servant. When he died in January of 1924, Stalin seized an opportunity to elevate Lenin and the ideology and the personality around him, and seized Lenin for himself. Writing in Pravda on January 30th, 1924, Stalin wrote a eulogy. Listen to both the tone and content of Stalin's eulogy of Lenin. In departing from us, Comrade Lenin enjoined on us to hold high and keep pure the great calling of a member of the Communist Party. We vow to thee that we will keep honorably this thy commandment. In departing from us, Comrade Lenin enjoined on us to guard the unity of our party as the apple of our eye. We vow to thee, Comrade Lenin, that we will honorably fulfill this thy commandment. In departing from us, Comrade Lenin enjoined on us to guard and strengthen the dictatorship of the proletariat. We vow to thee, Comrade Lenin, that we will not spare our strength to fulfill this thy commandment. In departing from us, Comrade Lenin enjoined on us to strengthen with all our might the union of workers and peasants. We vow to thee, Comrade Lenin, that we will honorably fulfill this thy commandment. In departing from us, Comrade Lenin enjoined on us to strengthen and extend the union of republics. We vow to thee, Comrade Lenin, that we will honorably fill this thy commandment. In departing from us, Comrade Lenin enjoined on us to remain faithful to the principles of the Communist Internationale. We vow to thee, Comrade Lenin, that we will not spare our lives to strengthen and extend the union of workers, of people of the whole world, the Communist Internationale. Here Stalin is using the language, the style, and the content of religion. He's using language to elevate Lenin to the ranks of a Greek god or a Catholic or Greek Orthodox saint. This thy commandment. So that Stalin monopolized the death of Lenin and elevated his words to commandments. It wasn't simply Stalin who adored Lenin. Lenin was a very popular leader among the ranks of revolutionaries. And so Stalin had the body of Lenin embalmed, and that the body was then placed on public viewing for days. And you can see then in this picture that in the depths of a Russian winter, in January in Russia, thousands and millions of people waited in line to view the dead Lenin. He was adored by millions. Stalin was able to capture that adoration and took the glow of Lenin and transferred it to himself. Well, who was Stalin? Well, Stalin was the general secretary of the Communist Party. As the general secretary of the Communist Party, he kept the party records. He kept the party membership list. Anyone who wanted to become a member of the party had to go through Joseph Stalin. And since the party controlled everything in the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, Stalin then asked for favors from anyone whom he let in. There was a split then between the old Bolsheviks, people who had gained power and status before the Communist Revolution, people who had worked before World War I, and those people that were entering into the party after the Soviet Union was founded. The only way to serve in the Soviet Union was to be a member of the Communist Party, and Joseph Stalin controlled membership. That meant that Joseph Stalin controlled the party apparatus. The Russian word is apparatchik. And so the apparatchiks owed their allegiance and their position to Joseph Stalin, and he used that leverage to gain power and gain control for himself. So his rise to power rests on two things. First, his position as party chairman, and second, his position or his goal of monopolizing the death of Lenin. He used the death of Lenin to elevate himself to a leadership position. Once Lenin was dead, though, Stalin worked to cultivate his own cult of personality. He used the newspaper, he used the radio, he used movies to present himself as the savior of communism. Listen to this testament of A.O. Avendinko. Thank you, Stalin. Thank you because I am joyful. Thank you because I am well. No matter how old I become, I shall never forget how we received Stalin 2 days ago. Centuries will pass and generations still to come will regard us as the happiest of mortals, as the most fortunate of men, because we lived in the century of centuries, because we were privileged to see Stalin, our inspired leader. Yes, and we regard ourselves as the happiest of mortals because we are the contemporaries of a man who never had an equal in the world history. The men of all ages will call on thy name, which is strong, beautiful, and wise, and marvelous. Thy name is engraved on every factory, every machine. Thy name is engraved on the earth and in the hearts of all men. Every time I found myself in his presence, I have been subjugated by his strength, his charm, his grandeur. I have experienced a great desire to sing, to cry out, to shout with joy and happiness, and to see me on the same platform where the great Stalin stood a year ago. In what country, in what part of the world could such a thing happen? I write books. I'm an author. All thanks to thee, O great educator Stalin. I love a young woman with renewed love and shall perpetuate myself in my children. All thanks to thee, great Stalin. I shall be eternally happy and joyous, all thanks to thee, great educator Stalin. Everything belongs to thee, chief of our great country. And when the woman I love presents me with a child, the first word it shall utter will be Stalin. O great Stalin, O leader of the peoples, thou who broughtest man to birth, thou who fructest the earth, thou who restorest the century, thou who makes bloom the spring, thou who makest vibrant musical chords, thou splendor of my spring, O thou sun reflected by millions of hearts. My heart flutters. Stalin promoted a cult of personality. He encouraged writers, artists, filmmakers to present him in the best possible light, in the same way Stalin had presented Lenin after he died. Lenin would never tolerate these types of adoration. Lenin was even upset that someone threw him a birthday party. That was not something he wanted. He lived a very simple and humble life. Stalin seized upon this cult of personality to elevate and strengthen his own position within the Soviet Union.